You're letting your emotions control you exactly like the weak-minded citizens Marcus Aurelius despised, and it's destroying your ability to think clearly. 2,000 years ago, while leading armies and governing millions, this philosopher-emperor discovered that 90% of mental suffering comes from one fatal thinking error we all make daily. His method for developing an emperor's mindset has been hidden in plain sight, and mastering it will give you the mental discipline of a Roman ruler. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from what part of the world you're watching, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Imagine this. Your boss criticizes your work in front of colleagues. In an instant, your heart races, your face flushes, and your mind floods with defensive thoughts. Later, you replay the scene over and over, unable to focus on anything else. This emotional hijacking isn't just uncomfortable, it's sabotaging your ability to think clearly when you need it most. Sound familiar? You're experiencing what psychologists call emotional reactivity, the automatic, often overwhelming response to perceived threats that bypasses your rational mind. This isn't just an occasional inconvenience. It's a daily battle that determines the quality of your decisions, relationships, and ultimately, your life. The average person experiences 27 emotional triggers per day, and research shows we spend roughly 70% of our waking hours in reactive rather than responsive states. This means that for most of us, our emotions, not our reason, are making our most important decisions. What's fascinating is that this battle between emotion and reason isn't new. 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome from 161 to 180 CE, documented this exact same struggle in his personal journal, which we now know as Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, wrote Marcus, not as a detached philosopher, but as a leader facing problems that would crush most people. While you might be dealing with difficult colleagues or financial stress, Marcus was managing military rebellions, political conspiracies, and a devastating plague that killed millions, all while maintaining his mental clarity. But here's what most people get wrong about Marcus and the Stoics. They weren't emotionless robots. In fact, Marcus openly wrote about his struggles with anger, impatience, and anxiety. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, "The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly," he noted, acknowledging the daily challenges of dealing with difficult people. The Stoics weren't trying to eliminate emotions. They were developing practical methods to prevent emotions from eliminating reason. And they weren't alone in this struggle. Seneca, another famous Stoic, served as advisor to Emperor Nero, possibly the most dangerous boss in history. In his letters, Seneca described how anxiety would keep him awake at night, and how he constantly battled the fear of losing his wealth and status, fears that were justified, as Nero eventually ordered him to commit suicide. Then there's Epictetus, who began life as a slave with a cruel master who once deliberately broke his leg, leaving him permanently disabled. Despite these circumstances, or perhaps because of them, Epictetus developed techniques for maintaining inner freedom regardless of external conditions. What unites these Stoics isn't some abstract philosophical theory, but a practical toolkit for mental resilience that works regardless of your circumstances. They discovered something revolutionary. Most of our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. Let me illustrate this with a modern example. Two people receive the same criticism at work. The first person thinks, "This is terrible. My boss hates me. I might lose my job." Their day is ruined, their sleep disrupted, and their work suffers as anxiety takes over. The second person thinks, "This feedback is uncomfortable but useful. I can improve from this." They feel momentary discomfort, but quickly refocus on solutions. Same event, different judgments, radically different experiences. This distinction, between events and our judgments about events is the cornerstone of Stoic practice and the foundation of modern cognitive behavioral therapy. Take a moment right now and think about something that upset you recently. Was it the event itself that caused your suffering, or was it your interpretation of what that event meant? I'll wait while you consider this. Did you notice how your mind automatically added meaning to whatever happened? That's what our brains do. They're meaning-making machines. The problem isn't that we interpret events, it's that we often don't realize we're doing it. We confuse our judgments with reality itself. A recent study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that participants who practiced Stoic exercises for just 2 weeks reported a 16% decrease in negative emotions and a 12% increase in life satisfaction compared to control groups. The science is clear, these ancient practices work. But I don't want to just give you information, I want to give you transformation. Over the next sections, I'll share 3 specific Stoic techniques that you can apply immediately to develop what I call the Emperor's mindset. The ability to maintain clarity and composure regardless of external circumstances. Pause the video right now and think of a situation from the past week where your emotions hijacked your reasoning. Got it? This is exactly what we'll be addressing with the Emperor's Toolkit. The situation you just identified probably left you feeling out of control, right? Maybe you said something you regretted or made a decision that wasn't aligned with your deeper values. This is what happens when emotions override reason. But what if you could maintain your clarity even in those triggering moments? Consider how different your life would be if you could respond thoughtfully to criticism instead of reacting defensively. If you could face uncertainty with calm confidence instead of anxiety. If you could experience disappointment without spiraling into despair. This isn't about becoming some emotionless calculator. It's about developing the ability to experience emotions without being controlled by them. The Stoics understood that emotions provide valuable information, but they shouldn't make our decisions for us. Think about driving a car. Your emotions are like the gas pedal. They provide energy and motivation. Your reason is like the steering wheel. It directs that energy toward productive outcomes. The problem for most of us is that we let emotions control both the gas and the steering, which inevitably leads to crashes. I experienced this myself last month when a project I'd worked on for weeks was criticized by a client. My immediate emotional reaction was defensive anger. I felt my face flush, my heart race, and my mind filled with all the reasons why the client was wrong. Had I acted on those emotions, I might have damaged an important relationship or missed valuable feedback. But instead, I used one of the Stoic techniques I'll be teaching you, what I call the imperial pause. Those crucial 3 seconds between stimulus and response that give you back control over your reactions. This simple practice changed not only the outcome of that situation, but my entire experience of it. What's remarkable about these Stoic practices is that they don't require you to change your life circumstances. You don't need a meditation retreat or perfect conditions. These are battlefield techniques developed by people facing immense challenges. Marcus Aurelius practiced them while leading armies and running an empire. Seneca used them while navigating the deadly politics of Nero's court. Epictetus taught them from the perspective of someone who had been enslaved. If these techniques worked for them under those conditions, imagine what they can do for you in your daily challenges. I promise that by the end of this video, you'll have practical tools that will immediately change how you respond to difficult situations. These aren't abstract concepts, but battle-tested practices that have worked for centuries, from Roman battlefields to modern boardrooms. The transformation I'm offering isn't becoming emotionless. It's developing the ability to choose which emotions serve you and which ones don't. It's about experiencing joy without clinging to it, acknowledging pain without being defined by it, and facing uncertainty with the calm confidence that allowed Marcus Aurelius to write his timeless wisdom while leading armies on the front lines. Before we dive into the specific techniques, I want to address a common misconception about Stoicism. Many people think it means suppressing emotions or adopting a stiff upper lip. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Stoics were deeply concerned with human flourishing and living a life of virtue, not just enduring hardship. As Seneca wrote, "What is the goal of Stoicism? Tranquility, and to live in harmony with nature." This tranquility isn't emotional flatness. It's the profound peace that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you. The Stoics recognized that we can't control external events, but we have absolute freedom in how we respond to them. This isn't just philosophical wordplay, it's a practical distinction that transforms your experience of reality. Think about it this way. How much of your suffering comes from trying to control things you can't possibly control? Other people's opinions, traffic, the weather, the economy, the past? The Stoics would say this effort is not just futile, but the source of most of our unhappiness. Now, what would happen if you redirected all that energy toward the one thing you can control? Your own thoughts and actions. This is where true power lies, and it's accessible to you right now, regardless of your circumstances. I've seen these principles transform lives across all walks of life. A single mother who used Stoic techniques to manage the overwhelming stress of balancing work and parenting. A cancer patient who found profound peace during treatment by focusing on what remained within his control. A student who overcame debilitating test anxiety by applying the distinction between events and judgments. These aren't exceptional cases. They're examples of what happens when people apply these timeless principles to modern challenges. So let's get practical. In the next section, I'm going to share the first technique from the Emperor's Toolkit, the imperial pause, those crucial 3 seconds between stimulus and response that give you back control over your reactions. When you master this, you'll understand why Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. It's about creating a mental space that even the most irritating people can't invade. You've probably noticed how certain people or situations seem to have a remote control for your emotions. One comment and boom, you're reacting before you even think. That colleague who always takes credit for your work. The family member who knows exactly which button to push. The social media post that somehow ruins your entire morning. We all have these triggers and they often make us feel powerless. But what if I told you that your reactions aren't inevitable? That between every trigger and your response lies a space that most people never notice but that holds the key to mental freedom. This is what the Stoics discovered thousands of years ago, and it's what modern psychology confirms. Your power lies not in controlling external events, but in mastering that crucial space between stimulus and response. This brings us to the foundation of the Emperor's mindset, what I call perception mastery, the ability to distinguish between events and your judgments about those events. This isn't just philosophical wordplay, it's a practical skill that transforms your experience of reality. When something happens, you miss a deadline, someone cuts you off in traffic, or your partner says something hurtful, your brain automatically adds layers of interpretation that aren't actually part of the objective reality. She's always disrespecting me. Nothing ever goes my way. I'm a failure. These judgments feel like facts, but they're actually optional interpretations. Marcus Aurelius practiced this distinction constantly, writing, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Let that sink in for a moment. The pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. This means that the power to change your experience doesn't require changing the world. It requires changing your interpretations. Take a moment right now to think about something that bothered you recently. Maybe it was a critical comment, a rejection, or a mistake you made. Now try to separate what actually happened, the objective event, from your interpretation of what it meant. It's harder than it sounds, isn't it? Our judgments are so automatic that they feel inseparable from the events themselves. This brings us to the first technique I want to teach you, what I call the imperial pause, a 3-second mental space between stimulus and response that gives you back control over your reactions. Here's how it works. When you feel that surge of emotion, anger, anxiety, frustration, mentally declare, "This is just an impression, not the thing itself." This tiny pause interrupts your automatic reaction, creating space for your rational mind to regain command. Let me share a personal example. I once received an email that made my blood boil. It questioned my expertise in an area I've spent years studying. My immediate reaction was defensive anger and a desire to fire back a scathing response. But I remembered the imperial pause. I literally said out loud, "This is just an impression, not the thing itself." In those 3 seconds, I realized my anger stemmed not from the email itself, but from my judgment that I was being disrespected. Once I separated the event from my judgment, I could see other interpretations. Perhaps the sender was genuinely confused or poorly expressed a valid question. My response shifted from defensive to informative, avoiding what could have been a damaging exchange. The science behind this practice is fascinating. When you experience a threatening stimulus, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, activates before your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking, can assess the situation. This is why reactions feel so automatic and beyond your control. The imperial pause creates a buffer that allows your prefrontal cortex to catch up and take the wheel. Studies show that even a 3-second pause can significantly reduce the intensity of emotional reactions and improve decision quality. It's like having a superpower hidden in plain sight. Pause the video and think about a recurring trigger in your life. Maybe it's a specific comment from your partner, a particular tone from your boss, or a situation that reliably sets you off. Now, imagine applying the imperial pause the next time it happens. Just 3 seconds can completely change the outcome. But how do you actually implement this pause when emotions are running high? Here are 3 practical ways to create that crucial space. First, use your breath. When you notice an emotional trigger, take one deep breath while mentally saying, "This is just an impression." This physical act interrupts the automatic emotional cascade and buys you precious seconds. Second, use physical sensation as an early warning system. Our bodies often react to triggers before our conscious minds register them. A tightening in your chest, a flush of heat, tension in your shoulders. When you notice these physical cues, they become your signal to implement the pause. Third, create a personal reminder phrase that works for you. Marcus Aurelius used, "This is an impression, not the thing itself." You might prefer, "I choose my response," or "event, not interpretation." The exact words matter less than their ability to create that crucial space. Let's apply this to some common scenarios where the imperial pause can be transformative. On social media, when you read a comment that triggers you, implement the pause before responding. Ask yourself, what am I actually reacting to here? The comment itself, or my interpretation of the commenter's intent? This single pause has saved countless people from responses they later regret. At work, when a colleague interrupts you in a meeting, use the pause to separate the event, being interrupted, from your interpretation. They don't respect me. This creates space to respond strategically rather than emotionally. In relationships, when your partner says something that hurts you, the pause allows you to distinguish between what was actually said and what you heard through your filters of past experiences and insecurities. A client of mine used this technique with remarkable results. He was a senior executive who would become visibly angry whenever his ideas were questioned in meetings. This reactive pattern was damaging his leadership reputation. After practicing the imperial pause for just 2 weeks, his team noticed a dramatic difference. Not only was he responding more thoughtfully to challenges, but he actually began to welcome critical feedback as valuable input rather than personal attacks. The beauty of this technique is that it works whether you're facing minor irritations or major crises. The principles remain the same. Create space, separate event from interpretation, choose your response. Now, I want to be realistic. When you first start practicing the imperial pause, you'll likely only notice the need for it after you've already reacted. That's normal and part of the learning process. You might think, I should have paused there, only after sending the angry email or making the sarcastic comment. This retrospective awareness is actually the first step toward real-time application. Each time you notice a missed opportunity to pause, you're strengthening the neural pathways that will eventually help you catch those moments before reacting. Marcus Aurelius understood this gradual process. In his private journal, we see him repeatedly reminding himself of the same principles, acknowledging his own struggles to apply them consistently. Even as Emperor of Rome, he was a student of his own mind, constantly working to create that space between stimulus and response. Here's a practical exercise to develop your imperial pause muscle. Start with low-stakes situations. When your phone buzzes with a notification, pause before checking it. When you're about to respond to an email, take 3 seconds to consider your response. When you feel mild irritation at something mundane like traffic or a long line, practice creating that space. By developing this skill in lower intensity situations, you build the mental pathways that will be available to you when facing more challenging triggers. Remember that the goal isn't to suppress your emotions or become robotic in your responses. The goal is to experience emotions without being controlled by them, to add the dimension of choice to your emotional life. As you practice the imperial pause, you'll begin to notice something fascinating. The quality of your emotions changes. They become more nuanced, less overwhelming. You'll experience what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between similar emotions and understand their causes more precisely. Instead of just feeling angry, you might notice you're feeling disappointed that your expectations weren't met or concerned that your contribution wasn't valued. This granularity gives you much more information to work with and many more options for response. The progress you can expect as you practice is remarkable. In the first week, you'll likely notice your reactions after they've occurred. By week 2, you'll start catching yourself in the middle of reacting. By week 3, you'll begin to notice the impulse to react before acting on it. And by week 4, you'll find yourself automatically creating that space between stimulus and response in most situations. This is the power of the imperial pause. It gives you back control over your mental kingdom. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion." There is never any need to get worked up about things you can't control. Take a moment now to commit to practicing the imperial pause today. Identify one specific trigger situation where you'll implement it. Maybe it's checking your email, having a particular conversation, or entering a stressful environment. Set an intention to create that 3-second space when the trigger occurs. But the imperial pause is just the beginning. What if you could anticipate emotional triggers before they even occurred? The Stoics had a fascinating technique for this, called premeditatio malorum, that I've renamed strategic premeditation. This isn't negative thinking, it's mental preparation that builds resilience before you need it. Seneca practiced this regularly, writing, "He who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." Modern research in sports psychology shows that mental rehearsal activates many of the same neural pathways as physical practice, creating what scientists call mental maps that your brain can follow during actual events. Do you know that feeling when you're lying in bed at night, mentally rehearsing a difficult conversation you need to have tomorrow? Or how before a job interview you imagine different questions they might ask? There's a natural wisdom in this mental preparation, but most of us do it haphazardly and often focus more on what could go wrong than on how we'll respond effectively. What if I told you the Stoics developed this natural tendency into a powerful practice that modern psychology has proven transforms our resilience? Seneca, who navigated the deadly politics of Emperor Nero's court, wrote, "He who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." This wasn't just philosophical musing, it was a survival strategy. While you might not be dealing with a homicidal emperor, this same approach can transform how you handle everyday challenges. The technique I want to share with you now is what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, or what I've renamed strategic premeditation. This isn't negative thinking. It's mental preparation that builds resilience before you need it. Each morning, spend 2 minutes visualizing potential challenges you might face that day. The difficult conversation with your colleague, traffic on your commute, the temptation to procrastinate, and mentally rehearse responding with reason rather than reaction. I know what you might be thinking. Isn't this just worrying about problems that haven't happened yet? That's a great question, and it highlights the crucial difference between worry and strategic premeditation. Worry is unfocused anxiety about what might go wrong. Strategic premeditation is focused preparation for how you'll respond effectively when challenges arise. Think of it like a firefighter's drill. They don't practice putting out fires because they're pessimistic or anxious. They practice because preparation creates competence under pressure. In the same way, mentally rehearsing your response to challenges isn't dwelling on negativity. It's building neural pathways that you can follow when emotions run high. Neuroscience confirms that this practice actually strengthens neural pathways. When you mentally rehearse a calm, reasoned response to a trigger, you're literally rewiring your brain to make that response more automatic when the real situation occurs. Studies with athletes show that mental practice activates many of the same brain regions as physical practice, creating what scientists call mental maps that your brain can follow during actual events. Let me share a personal example. I used to get incredibly nervous before important presentations. My heart would race, my mind would go blank, and I'd lose the natural flow of my ideas. So I started practicing strategic premeditation. Each morning before a presentation day, I'd spend 2 minutes visualizing potential challenges, technology failing, difficult questions, losing my train of thought, and mentally rehearse implementing the imperial pause and responding calmly. The first time I tried this, something remarkable happened. When my slides actually did malfunction during the presentation, instead of panicking, I found myself calmly saying, "Let's take this opportunity to have a more interactive discussion while we resolve this." The situation I had mentally prepared for happened, and the neural pathway I had created was right there, waiting for me to follow it. A client of mine, a senior executive with a short temper, used strategic premeditation before board meetings where a particular colleague often triggered his anger. After just 3 weeks of this practice, his team noticed a dramatic difference in his composure, and he reported feeling in control for the first time during tense interactions. Now, let's make this practical for you. Pause the video for 60 seconds and think about a challenging situation you'll face in the next 24 hours. It could be a difficult conversation, a stressful commute, a temptation you want to resist, or a task you've been avoiding. Got it? Now spend the next minute visualizing yourself facing that challenge and implementing the imperial pause we learned about earlier. See yourself creating that space between stimulus and response, and then choosing a reasoned response rather than an emotional reaction. How did that feel? A bit awkward, perhaps? That's normal. Like any new skill, strategic premeditation feels unnatural at first. But with consistent practice, it becomes second nature. Here's how to integrate this into your daily life. Each morning, after you wake up but before you check your phone, this is crucial. Don't let other people's agendas hijack your mental preparation. Spend 2 minutes on strategic premeditation. First, identify 2 or 3 potential trigger situations you might face today. Be specific. Not just work stress, but the meeting where my colleague might criticize my project. Second, visualize each situation in vivid detail. See the environment, the people involved, even what you're wearing. The more specific your visualization, the more effective the preparation. Third, imagine yourself implementing the imperial pause when the trigger occurs. See yourself taking that breath, creating that space. Fourth, visualize responding with reason rather than reaction. See yourself speaking calmly, asking clarifying questions, or strategically disengaging if necessary. This entire process takes just 2 minutes, but its impact on your day can be profound. You're essentially creating mental rehearsals that your brain can follow later when emotions might otherwise take over. Seneca took this practice even further. He regularly contemplated major setbacks like loss of wealth, status, or even loved ones. While this might sound morbid to modern ears, he found that mentally rehearsing his response to even worst-case scenarios gave him confidence to face whatever actually occurred. As he wrote, "What is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness adds to the weight of a disaster." Again, this isn't about expecting the worst. It's about removing the element of surprise that often amplifies our emotional reactions. When something challenging happens that you've mentally prepared for, your response is likely to be, "I knew this might happen, and I know how to handle it," rather than, "I can't believe this is happening to me." Let me give you another practical example. Think about that person in your life who reliably triggers an emotional reaction in you, perhaps a critical family member, a micromanaging boss, or a neighbor who never seems satisfied. Instead of hoping they'll magically change, which rarely works, spend 2 minutes tomorrow morning visualizing your next interaction with them. See them saying or doing the thing that typically triggers you. Now, visualize yourself implementing the imperial pause. See yourself creating that crucial space between their behavior and your response. Then imagine choosing a response based on your values rather than your immediate emotional reaction. This doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. In fact, quite the opposite. When you respond from reason rather than reaction, you're often more effective at setting boundaries, clarifying expectations, or addressing issues directly. The difference is that you're doing so strategically rather than emotionally. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that this kind of detailed implementation planning made participants 300% more likely to follow through on their intentions compared to those who simply had good intentions without specific plans. Think about that. A 300% increase in follow-through just from mentally rehearsing how you'll handle specific situations. I remember struggling with this practice myself at first. It felt awkward and artificial to imagine scenarios that hadn't happened yet. But within days, I noticed a dramatic difference in my actual responses when those situations occurred. The mental rehearsal created a path of least resistance that my brain naturally followed. One particularly powerful way to use strategic premeditation is for habits you're trying to change. If you're trying to eat healthier, spend 2 minutes visualizing specific temptation scenarios you might face today. The donuts in the break room, the dinner out with friends, the stress that typically triggers snacking, and mentally rehearse implementing the imperial pause and making choices aligned with your goals. Similarly, If you're working on reducing social media use, visualize the specific triggers that usually lead to mindless scrolling, boredom, anxiety, a notification, and rehearse your planned response, whether that's taking a deep breath, setting a timer, or choosing a different activity. By day 10 of implementing strategic premeditation, I recommend combining your evening reflection with your morning preparation, using yesterday's triggers to inform tomorrow's mental rehearsal. This creates a powerful feedback loop that accelerates your progress. For example, if you notice in your evening reflection that you got triggered by a passive-aggressive email, you can use that information in tomorrow's strategic premeditation to prepare specifically for similar communications. This loop of experience, reflection, and preparation creates rapid growth in your emotional resilience. Now, I want to address a common concern. Won't focusing on potential problems create more anxiety? It's a reasonable question, but research and experience suggest the opposite is true. Studies show that strategic worry, time-limited, solution-focused contemplation of potential challenges, actually reduces overall anxiety compared to the unfocused worry that many of us default to. Think about it this way. Your mind is likely to consider potential problems anyway. Strategic premeditation simply channels that natural tendency in a productive direction, focusing not just on what might go wrong, but on how you'll respond effectively. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, writing, "Begin each day by telling yourself, 'Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness.'" This wasn't pessimism, it was preparation. By anticipating these challenges, he was less surprised and disturbed when they occurred. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, taught his students, "Don't just say you have read the books. Show that through them you have learned to think better, to be a more discriminating and reflective person." Books are the training weights of the mind. They are very helpful, but it would be a bad mistake to suppose that one has made progress simply by having internalized their contents. In other words, knowledge becomes wisdom only through practice. Strategic premeditation is how we transform our understanding of Stoic principles into lived experience. As you incorporate this practice into your daily routine, you'll begin to notice something remarkable. The gap between your intentions and your actions will start to close. We all know the feeling of planning to respond calmly to criticism or temptation, only to find ourselves reacting emotionally in the moment. Strategic premeditation bridges that gap by creating neural pathways that your brain can follow even when emotions run high. Let's do one more practical exercise before we move on. Think about a recurring challenge in your life, something that happens regularly and typically triggers an emotional reaction. Maybe it's your teenager's messy room, traffic on your commute, or a particular type of client request. Now, spend 30 seconds visualizing that specific situation and mentally rehearsing implementing the imperial pause when it occurs. See yourself creating that space between stimulus and response, and then choosing a response aligned with your values rather than your immediate emotional reaction. This simple 30-second exercise, repeated daily, can dramatically change your experience of these recurring challenges. You're training your brain to follow a new path, one that leads to greater peace and effectiveness. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate emotions. The Stoics weren't emotionless robots, and neither should you be. The goal is to experience emotions without being controlled by them, to add the dimension of choice to your emotional life. As you practice strategic premeditation alongside the imperial pause, you're developing what the Stoics would call the virtue of prudence, practical wisdom that allows you to navigate life's challenges with grace and effectiveness. But what about those situations that catch you completely off guard? What about the unexpected losses, changes, or challenges that no amount of premeditation could have prepared you for? This is where the third Stoic technique becomes essential: what I call perspective shifting, a practice Marcus Aurelius used to break free from narrow, emotionally charged viewpoints. When facing a challenge, consciously adopt multiple perspectives by asking yourself, how would I view this situation in 5 years? What would I advise a friend facing this same problem? And what opportunity for growth might be hidden in this obstacle? These questions create mental flexibility and emotional distance from your immediate reactions. Have you ever gotten completely obsessed with a problem only to later realize it wasn't nearly as serious as it first seemed? We've all been there. Remember that email that ruined your entire day until a week later when you barely remembered it? Or that mistake at work that felt career-ending until a month passed and it became just another learning experience? This mental tunnel vision is exactly what the Stoics identified as one of our biggest sources of suffering. When we're caught in an emotional reaction, our perspective narrows dramatically. It's like looking at the world through a straw. We see only one tiny portion of reality, usually the most threatening part. This narrowing served our ancestors well when facing predators, but in modern life, it typically just amplifies our suffering unnecessarily. That's where our third powerful Stoic technique comes in, what I call perspective shifting, a practice Marcus Aurelius used to break free from narrow, emotionally charged viewpoints. When facing a challenge, consciously adopt multiple perspectives by asking yourself 3 key questions. First, how would I view this situation in 5 years? Second, what would I advise a friend facing this same problem? Third, what opportunity for growth might be hidden in this obstacle? These questions create mental flexibility and emotional distance from your immediate reactions. They activate different parts of your brain, moving you from the reactive amygdala to the thoughtful prefrontal cortex. It's like stepping back from a painting you've been examining nose to canvas and seeing the full image for the first time. Marcus Aurelius was a master of this technique. When facing betrayal from a close friend who joined a rebellion against him, he wrote, "Consider that men will do the same things nevertheless, even though you would burst with rage." This perspective shift, recognizing that people act according to their own nature, not your expectations, helped him respond with strategic wisdom rather than vengeful emotion. While he still took necessary action to protect the empire, he did so from clarity rather than rage. Imagine how differently history might have played out if he had responded from pure emotional vengeance rather than reasoned perspective. A recent study from Stanford University found that adopting a third-person perspective when thinking about emotional events reduced activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, while increasing activity in the prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and executive function. In other words, perspective shifting literally changes your brain's processing of emotional events. Let me share how I used this technique myself when I was passed over for a promotion I felt I deserved. My initial perspective was victim-centered. This is unfair. They don't value me. My emotions were a mix of resentment, hurt, and anger, not exactly a productive mental state. But then I applied perspective shifting. When I asked how I'd view this in 5 years, I realized it would likely be a minor blip in my career. Perhaps even a redirection towards something better aligned with my strengths. When I considered what I'd tell a friend, I recognized there were legitimate reasons someone else might have been selected, and that this was an opportunity to seek feedback for growth. And when I looked for the opportunity, I identified specific skills I could develop to strengthen my next application. This shift in perspective didn't change the event, but it completely transformed my experience of it, from deflating rejection to motivating challenge. The facts remained the same, but my relationship to those facts changed dramatically. Pause the video and try this right now with a current challenge you're facing. How would you view it in 5 years? What would you advise a friend? What opportunity might be hidden within it? I'll wait. Did you notice how your emotional relationship to the problem shifted? That's the power of perspective, and it's available to you in any situation. Let's look more closely at each of these perspective-shifting questions and how to apply them effectively. The first question: how would I view this situation in 5 years? Creates temporal distance. Most things that seem catastrophic in the moment look very different with time. Think about a significant problem you faced 5 years ago. How important does it seem now? Probably much less significant than it felt at the time. When you ask this question, you're not dismissing your current feelings. You're simply adding a broader timeline to your assessment. This temporal zooming out often reveals that what feels permanent is actually temporary. What feels catastrophic is manageable, and what feels like failure is merely feedback. Seneca practiced this regularly, writing, "Many of the things which tormented us at the time afforded us pleasure." He recognized that time transforms our perspective, and we can borrow from our future selves by imagining that transformation now. The second question: what would I advise a friend facing this same problem? Creates psychological distance. We're often much wiser when thinking about others' problems than our own. This isn't just anecdotal. Research shows we make more rational decisions when considering situations from a third-person perspective. When a friend comes to you with a problem, you naturally see the bigger picture, consider multiple factors, and suggest reasonable solutions. But when facing our own challenges, we get caught in emotional reactions and narrow thinking. This question allows you to access your own wisdom by creating distance from your immediate emotional response. Epictetus taught this approach to his students, encouraging them to step outside their personal dramas and view situations as if they were happening to someone else. When something happens, he advised, the only thing in your power is your attitude toward it. You can either accept it or resent it. The third question: what opportunity for growth might be hidden in this obstacle? Creates meaning from challenge. This perspective shift is particularly powerful because it transforms problems from pure negatives into potential positives, not through naive optimism, but through strategic reframing. Marcus Aurelius was a master of this approach, writing, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He recognized that obstacles aren't just barriers to progress. They're often the very means of progress when approached with the right perspective. Think about how muscle grows, not through ease, but through resistance. Our mental and emotional capabilities develop similarly. The challenges that initially seem like pure negatives often become the catalysts for our most significant growth. A client of mine used this technique when facing a medical diagnosis that limited her physical activities. Initially devastated, she asked what opportunity might be hidden in this obstacle. This perspective shift led her to discover meditation and mind-body practices that not only helped her manage her condition, but eventually became a new career path, helping others with similar challenges. This story illustrates an important point about perspective shifting. It's not about denying reality or pretending problems don't exist. It's about expanding your view to see more of reality, including aspects that might be beneficial or meaningful. Now, let's enhance this practice with what I call the Stoic zoom-out exercise. When facing a challenging situation, imagine progressively widening your perspective. First, see the situation from your immediate perspective, how it affects you right now. Second, zoom out to how it might look 1 week from now. Third, 1 year from now. Fourth, from the perspective of your entire lifetime. Finally, from the perspective of humanity's existence. This cosmic perspective doesn't diminish your current challenge, but it places it in proper proportion. As Marcus wrote, "Consider yourself to be dead, and to have completed your life up to the present time, and now live according to nature the remainder which is allowed you." This might sound extreme, but consider how it transforms your priorities. When viewing your life from its end, what matters and what doesn't becomes startlingly clear. The colleague who annoyed you, the traffic that delayed you, the small failures and setbacks, they fade in significance. What remains are the deeper values, relationships, and contributions that give life meaning. A client who was devastated by a business failure used this exercise to recognize that while the loss was significant, it represented one chapter in a longer story. This perspective shift freed him from paralysis and allowed him to begin planning his next venture while still processing the disappointment. Let's practice this together. Think of a current issue that's causing you stress or anxiety. Now imagine you're looking back on this period, from 1 month in the future, from 1 year in the future, from your deathbed, reflecting on your whole life, from the perspective of human history. With each step back, notice how your current problem appears. Does it maintain the same significance? Or does it begin to look different within these larger contexts? This doesn't mean your current challenge isn't important or that you shouldn't address it. Rather, it helps you approach it with appropriate energy and perspective, rather than catastrophizing or over-identifying with temporary circumstances. What makes perspective shifting so powerful is how it works with your brain's natural functioning. When we're emotionally triggered, our perspective naturally narrows, an evolutionary response designed to focus attention on immediate threats. Perspective shifting deliberately counteracts this narrowing, activating brain regions associated with broader thinking, creativity, and problem solving. It's worth noting that this practice becomes more effective with time. The first few times you try perspective shifting during an emotional trigger, it might feel forced or artificial. This is normal. You're creating new neural pathways, and like any new trail, they require repeated use to become established. With consistent practice, however, these alternative perspectives become more accessible. Eventually, you'll notice yourself automatically considering multiple viewpoints when facing challenges, rather than getting stuck in a single, usually negative, interpretation. Let me address a common concern about perspective shifting. Isn't this just avoiding my real feelings? This is an important question. The goal isn't to bypass authentic emotions or gaslight yourself into pretending problems don't matter. The goal is to experience emotions without being limited by them, to add dimensions to your experience rather than subtract them. When you practice perspective shifting, you're not saying, "This doesn't matter." You're saying, "This matters, and there are multiple ways to understand it." You're expanding your emotional vocabulary beyond the first, usually most painful interpretation. This approach has deep roots in Stoic philosophy. The Stoics weren't trying to eliminate emotions, a common misconception, but to experience them in ways that enhanced rather than diminished wisdom. As Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters. Perspective shifting also improves relationships dramatically. When someone says or does something that triggers you, the ability to consider multiple interpretations of their behavior creates space for understanding rather than immediate judgment. Instead of assuming the worst intentions, you can consider alternative explanations and respond to the person rather than your interpretation. A fascinating study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that couples who practiced perspective-taking during conflicts reported higher relationship satisfaction and resolved disagreements more effectively than those who remained fixed in their viewpoints. The ability to see beyond your initial interpretation literally transforms your connection with others. As we conclude this chapter, I want to emphasize how these 3 Stoic techniques, the imperial pause, strategic premeditation, and perspective shifting, work together synergistically. The pause creates space, premeditation builds readiness, and perspective shifting expands options. Together, they form a powerful system for maintaining mental clarity, regardless of external circumstances. Think of these practices as a mental toolkit that you can deploy depending on the situation. Some challenges require all three techniques, while others might call for just one or two. With practice, you'll develop the wisdom to know which tool serves you best in each circumstance. But what happens when you face not just daily challenges, but truly devastating losses? How did the Stoics handle deep pain while maintaining their sanity? In the next chapter, I'll share Seneca's most powerful technique for facing losses, the same one he used when he was exiled and lost his entire fortune overnight. It's about a specific type of visualization that seems counterintuitive, but that psychologists today call emotional inoculation. Imagine waking up a month from now with the mental clarity of a Stoic philosopher, responding to challenges with wisdom instead of reactivity. Think about how different your day would feel. That difficult colleague no longer ruining your mood, traffic jams becoming merely neutral events, criticism becoming valuable feedback rather than personal attacks. This isn't some fantasy. It's a practical reality that the Stoics achieved 2,000 years ago and that you can develop with the right program. But here's the thing about Stoic wisdom. Knowing about these techniques is one thing. Actually implementing them in your daily life is entirely another. It's like the difference between watching a tutorial on swimming and actually getting in the water. That's why over the next few minutes, I'm going to transform the knowledge we've covered into a practical 4-week program that will systematically build the Emperor's mindset in your life. We'll start simple and gradually integrate more advanced techniques, creating lasting neural pathways rather than temporary inspiration. Think of it as training for your mind, just as you wouldn't expect to transform your physical fitness in a single gym session. Mental resilience requires consistent practice over time. For the first week, we're going to focus solely on creating that crucial 3-second gap between stimulus and response. This isn't about perfect application. It's about building awareness of your reaction patterns. This foundation is essential before we add more advanced techniques. I want you to start with what I call the trigger journal exercise. Each evening, spend 5 minutes writing down 3 things: what triggered a strong emotional reaction today, what your automatic response was, and most importantly, what judgment was hidden within your reaction. For example, if your boss interrupted you in a meeting, your automatic response might have been irritation and withdrawal. But what was the hidden judgment driving that reaction? It might be, "He doesn't respect me," or "My ideas aren't valued." Once you identify these hidden judgments, you gain power over them. A client of mine, a marketing manager, discovered through this exercise that her strongest reactions came not from direct criticism, but from feeling ignored. A pattern stemming from childhood experiences that was completely invisible to her until she started tracking her triggers. This awareness alone dramatically reduced the power these situations had over her emotional state. By day 3 or 4 of the trigger journal practice, something fascinating will happen. You'll start noticing your reactions in real time, which is the first step toward changing them. Don't be discouraged if you only catch yourself after reacting. Awareness always precedes change. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are." Pause the video right now and identify 3 common triggers in your daily life. Be specific, not just work stress, but when my colleague takes credit for my ideas, or when my partner looks at their phone while I'm talking. This specificity is crucial for effective practice. I'll wait while you think of your 3 triggers. Got them? Excellent. These specific triggers will become the focus of your awareness practice this week. Pay particular attention to your physical sensations when these situations arise. The tightness in your chest, the heat in your face, the tension in your shoulders. these bodily signals often precede conscious awareness of being triggered and can serve as early warning systems. By the end of week 1, aim to consistently notice your emotional reactions as they happen, even if you can't yet modify them. This awareness alone will reduce their intensity. As Epictetus taught, make it your study to draw distinctions between things that are in our power and things that are not. Your reactions are within your power once you become aware of them. Now, building on this foundation of trigger awareness, week 2 focuses on preparing for these challenges before they occur. This is where we implement strategic premeditation, the Stoic practice of mentally rehearsing challenges before facing them. Each morning, spend 3 minutes on the daily premeditation practice. First, identify 2 or 3 potential trigger situations you might face today. Second, visualize each situation in detail, including your physical surroundings. Third, mentally rehearse applying the imperial pause. And fourth, imagine responding with reason rather than reaction. The key to making this practice effective is specificity. Don't just think, "I'll stay calm if my coworker is difficult." Instead, visualize exactly what they might say or do, how your body might feel in response, tension, heat, constricted breathing, and precisely how you'll implement the pause, taking a breath, labeling your emotion, etc. I know this might seem like a lot to remember, but it becomes natural quickly. Think of it like a mental fire drill, a brief daily preparation that creates readiness for whatever challenges might arise. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that this kind of detailed implementation planning made participants 300% more likely to follow through on their intentions compared to those who simply had good intentions without specific plans. That's the difference between "I'll try to stay calm" and "when my boss criticizes my report, I'll take one deep breath, label my emotion as defensiveness, and then respond to the content rather than the delivery." I remember struggling with this practice myself at first. It felt awkward and artificial to imagine scenarios that hadn't happened yet. But within days, I noticed a dramatic difference in my actual responses when those situations occurred. The mental rehearsal created a path of least resistance that my brain naturally followed when under pressure. By day 10 of your practice, I want you to combine your evening trigger journal with your morning premeditation, using yesterday's triggers to inform tomorrow's preparation. This creates a powerful feedback loop that accelerates your progress. If you noticed yourself getting triggered by a passive-aggressive email yesterday, use that specific situation in tomorrow's premeditation. This cycle of experience, reflection, and preparation is exactly how Marcus Aurelius developed his remarkable mental discipline. His meditations show him repeatedly working through the same challenges, reflecting on his responses and preparing for future encounters. Even as Emperor of Rome, he was a student of his own mind, constantly working to align his reactions with his values. By the end of week 2, you'll have established awareness of your triggers and begun creating new neural pathways for more balanced responses. You might still react emotionally to triggers, but you'll recover more quickly and learn from each experience. Now, in the 3rd week of our program, we're going to expand your mental flexibility through deliberate perspective-shifting exercises. This is when the real transformation begins, moving from simply managing reactions to actually changing how you interpret events. Introduce what I call the 3-view method for any situation causing emotional distress. First, write down your initial interpretation, usually the most negative one. Second, write a completely opposite interpretation. Third, write a balanced view that incorporates elements of both. For example, if a friend doesn't return your calls, your initial view might be, "They're avoiding me, they don't value our friendship." The opposite view could be, "They're overwhelmed with their own issues and feel embarrassed about not being in touch." A balanced view might be, while I don't know exactly why they haven't called, there could be many explanations beyond my initial fear, and I can check in without assuming the worst. Pause the video and try this with a situation you're currently concerned about. What's your initial interpretation? What's an opposite view? What balanced perspective emerges? I'll give you a moment to do this. What you're doing with this exercise is training your mind to recognize that your first interpretation is just one of many possibilities, not an objective truth. This cognitive flexibility is exactly what allowed Marcus Aurelius to respond wisely to setbacks that would have overwhelmed less disciplined minds. As he wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." This isn't relativism. It's the recognition that our initial interpretations are heavily influenced by our emotions, past experiences, and current concerns. By day 15 of your practice, introduce what I call the Stoic zoom-out exercise. When facing a challenging situation, imagine progressively widening your perspective. How will this look 1 week from now? 1 year from now? From the perspective of your entire lifetime? From the perspective of humanity's existence? This cosmic perspective doesn't diminish your current challenge, but it places it in proper proportion. As Marcus wrote, "Consider yourself to be dead, and to have completed your life up to the present time, and now live according to nature the remainder which is allowed you." A client who was devastated by a business failure used this exercise to recognize that while the loss was significant, it represented one chapter in a longer story. This perspective shift freed him from paralysis and allowed him to begin planning his next venture while still processing the disappointment. In the final week of our program, we'll integrate all 3 techniques into a comprehensive daily practice and focus on applying them in increasingly challenging situations. Introduce what I call the daily dichotomy drill. Take a small notebook and draw a line down the middle, labeling one side "in my control" and the other "not in my control." Throughout your day, whenever you feel emotional distress, write down the situation and sort each aspect into the appropriate column. This practice, based directly on Epictetus's teaching that some things are within our power while others are not, forces you to direct your energy only toward what you can influence. You'll be shocked to discover how much mental bandwidth you waste trying to control the uncontrollable. A study from the University of California found that participants who regularly practice this kind of control differentiation reported 33% lower stress levels after 4 weeks compared to a control group. This makes perfect sense from a Stoic perspective. Stress often comes from trying to control things beyond our influence. Now it's time to apply these techniques to your most challenging triggers. Select one significant recurring issue in your life, perhaps a difficult relationship, a chronic stressor, or a persistent fear, and apply the full Emperor's Toolkit. Use the imperial pause whenever the issue triggers you. Premeditate potential developments each morning. Practice perspective shifting when you feel stuck, and regularly sort aspects into controllable and uncontrollable categories. This concentrated application to one major challenge demonstrates the true power of the Stoic approach. As Seneca noted, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. By focusing your practice on a significant challenge, you accelerate your development of mental resilience. I've seen remarkable transformations through this 4-week process. An executive who struggled with angry outbursts developed such mastery over his reactions that his team now jokes about his monk-like calm during crises. A woman whose anxiety about rejection prevented her from dating used these techniques to build a healthy relationship for the first time in her life. A student paralyzed by perfectionism used the dichotomy drill to focus only on his efforts rather than outcomes, dramatically improving both his performance and well-being. Pause the video and commit to this 4-week program right now. Decide when you'll start. ideally tomorrow morning, and put a reminder in your calendar to begin the trigger journal tomorrow evening. Remember that progress isn't linear. You'll have days of remarkable clarity, followed by moments where you completely forget to apply what you've learned. This isn't failure. It's part of the process. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, begin each day by telling yourself, "Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness." Even the emperor had to recommit to his practice daily. The key is consistency, not perfection. By implementing these techniques day after day, you're literally rewiring your brain, creating new neural pathways that will eventually become your default response pattern. But what happens when you face not just daily challenges, but truly devastating losses? How did the Stoics handle deep pain while maintaining their sanity? In the next section, I'll share Seneca's most powerful technique for facing losses, the same one he used when he was exiled and lost his entire fortune overnight. It's about a specific type of visualization that seems counterintuitive, but that psychologists today call emotional inoculation. Have you noticed how your first interpretation of an event is usually the most negative possible? There's an evolutionary reason for this, and a Stoic solution. Our brains evolved to scan for threats, so we naturally gravitate toward worst-case scenarios. It's a survival mechanism that served our ancestors well when predators lurked around every corner. But in modern life, this negativity bias often causes unnecessary suffering. In these next 2 weeks of our program, we're going to significantly expand your mental flexibility with more advanced techniques. The skills you've developed so far, awareness of triggers and the ability to pause, have laid crucial groundwork. Now we're ready to transform how you actually interpret events, not just how you respond to them. Let's begin with what I call the 3-view method, a powerful tool that instantly expands your possible interpretations. Whenever you face a situation causing emotional distress, I want you to write down 3 distinct perspectives. First, write your initial interpretation, which is typically the most negative one. Second, write a completely opposite interpretation, one that's positive or neutral. Third, create a balanced view that incorporates elements of both. Let me give you an example. A client of mine was devastated when she didn't receive a response to an important email she'd sent to her team leader. Her initial interpretation was, "He's ignoring me because my idea was terrible. I've lost all credibility." When I asked her to generate an opposite view, she said, "Maybe he's overwhelmed with other priorities and hasn't had time to respond thoughtfully." Her balanced perspective became, "While I don't know exactly why he hasn't responded yet, there are many possible explanations beyond my initial fear. I can follow up professionally without assuming the worst." What's powerful about this exercise is how it breaks the spell of certainty that accompanies our first interpretations. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." This isn't about denying reality. It's about recognizing that our initial take on reality is heavily filtered through our emotions, past experiences, and current concerns. Pause the video and try this with a situation that's currently bothering you. What's your initial interpretation? What's an opposite view? What balanced perspective emerges when you consider both? I'll give you a moment to do this. Did you notice how your emotional relationship to the situation shifted as you considered different interpretations? This mental flexibility is exactly what allowed Marcus Aurelius to respond wisely to setbacks that would have overwhelmed less disciplined minds. While others might be consumed by a single interpretation, usually the most painful one, you're developing the ability to see multiple possibilities. By day 15 of your practice, I want you to introduce what I call the Stoic zoom out exercise. When facing a challenging situation, imagine progressively widening your perspective. First, consider how this will look 1 week from now, then 1 year from now. Next, from the perspective of your entire lifetime. Finally, from the perspective of humanity's existence. This cosmic perspective doesn't diminish your current challenge, but it places it in proper proportion. Imagine you've just had an argument with someone important to you. From today's perspective, it might feel relationship threatening. From next week's perspective, it might look like a bumpy patch. From next year's view, it might appear as a necessary growing pain. From a lifetime perspective, it might register as a meaningful turning point. And from humanity's perspective, it's a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of human experience. As Marcus wrote, "Consider yourself to be dead, and to have completed your life up to the present time, and now live according to nature the remainder which is allowed you." This isn't morbid, it's clarifying. When you view your life from its end, what matters and what doesn't becomes startlingly clear. A client who was devastated by a business failure used this exercise to recognize that while the loss was significant, it represented one chapter in a longer story. This perspective shift freed him from paralysis and allowed him to begin planning his next venture while still processing the disappointment. He told me, "When I zoomed out and saw this as one chapter in my life rather than the whole book, I could breathe again." By practicing these perspective-shifting techniques, you're developing what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt your thinking to changing situations. Research shows that people with greater cognitive flexibility experience less depression and anxiety and recover more quickly from setbacks. The Stoics discovered this 2,000 years ago through observation and practice. Modern science has simply confirmed their wisdom. Now, as we enter the 4th week of our program, we'll integrate all 3 techniques: the imperial pause, strategic premeditation, and perspective shifting, into a comprehensive daily practice. This is where the real transformation happens, as these separate skills combine into a unified approach to life's challenges. Introduce what I call the daily dichotomy drill into your routine. Take a small notebook and draw a line down the middle, labeling one side "in my control" and the other "not in my control." Throughout your day, whenever you feel emotional distress, write down the situation and sort each aspect into the appropriate column. This practice comes directly from Epictetus, who began his handbook with this fundamental distinction. Some things are within our power, while others are not. Things in your control include your judgments, attitudes, efforts, and responses. Things not in your control include other people's opinions, external events, your reputation, and outcomes. You'll be amazed at how much mental energy you waste trying to control the uncontrollable. A study from the University of California found that participants who regularly practice this kind of control differentiation reported 33% lower stress levels after just 4 weeks compared to a control group. Why? Because they stopped exhausting themselves fighting battles they couldn't win and redirected that energy toward what they could actually influence. I remember when I first started this practice, I was shocked to discover how much of my daily anxiety centered around things I couldn't possibly control. What others thought of me, whether my flight would be delayed, if my proposal would be accepted. Just the act of categorizing these concerns brought immediate relief. Let me walk you through a quick example. Imagine you're nervous about an upcoming presentation. What aspects are in your control? Your preparation, your practice, your attitude, your response to questions. What's not in your control? Whether technology works perfectly, what the audience thinks of you, if someone asks an impossible question, whether you get the results you want. By focusing exclusively on what you can control, you eliminate unnecessary suffering and become more effective at the things you can actually influence. Now, it's time to apply these techniques to your most challenging triggers. Select one significant recurring issue in your life, perhaps a difficult relationship, a chronic stressor, or a persistent fear, and apply the full Emperor's Toolkit. Use the Imperial Pause whenever the issue triggers you. Premeditate potential developments each morning. Practice perspective shifting when you feel stuck. Regularly sort aspects into controllable and uncontrollable categories. This concentrated application to one major challenge demonstrates the true power of the Stoic approach. As Seneca noted, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. By focusing your practice on a significant challenge, you accelerate your development of mental resilience. A client of mine chose to apply these techniques to his relationship with a particularly critical family member. Every interaction had previously left him feeling inadequate and angry. By using the Imperial Pause during conversations, he was able to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. Through strategic premeditation, he prepared for triggering comments before family gatherings. Perspective shifting helped him see the criticism as a reflection of the other person's insecurities rather than his own worth. And the dichotomy drill reminded him that while he couldn't control what was said to him, he had complete control over his response. After just 1 month, family gatherings transformed from dreaded ordeals to manageable events. The criticism didn't stop. That wasn't in his control. But his relationship to it changed completely. As he told me, "They're saying the same things, but I'm hearing them differently." I've seen remarkable transformations through this 4-week process. An executive who struggled with angry outbursts developed such mastery over his reactions that his team now jokes about his monk-like calm during crises. A woman whose anxiety about rejection prevented her from dating used these techniques to build a healthy relationship for the first time in her life. A student paralyzed by perfectionism used the dichotomy drill to focus only on his efforts rather than outcomes, dramatically improving both his performance and well-being. Pause the video and commit to this 4-week program right now. Decide when you'll start, ideally tomorrow morning, and put a reminder in your calendar to begin the trigger journal tomorrow evening. Remember that progress isn't linear. You'll have days of remarkable clarity followed by moments where you completely forget to apply what you've learned. This isn't failure. It's part of the process. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, begin each day by telling yourself, "Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness." Even the emperor had to recommit to his practice daily. The key is consistency, not perfection. By implementing these techniques day after day, you're literally rewiring your brain, creating new neural pathways that will eventually become your default response pattern. Neuroscience confirms what the Stoics intuited. Our brains are remarkably plastic, capable of developing new response patterns at any age. But this rewiring requires repetition, just as building physical strength requires consistent exercise. Think of each application of these techniques as a mental rep, strengthening your philosophical muscles. Sometimes these reps will feel easy, and other times they'll be challenging. Both experiences contribute to your growth. I want to address a common concern at this stage of practice. Am I doing this right? Many people worry they're not experiencing dramatic enough changes or that they're still getting emotionally triggered despite their practice. This is completely normal. Remember that even Marcus Aurelius, after decades of Stoic practice, still had to remind himself of these principles daily. The goal isn't to never feel negative emotions. It's to develop the ability to work with them skillfully rather than being controlled by them. As you continue your practice beyond the 4-week program, you'll notice subtle but significant shifts in your relationship with challenging situations. Triggers that once ruined your entire day might now affect you for only minutes. Problems that seemed catastrophic might now appear as temporary obstacles. Conflicts that previously escalated might now resolve more quickly. These changes may seem small in the moment, but they compound over time to transform your entire experience of life. It's like compound interest for your mental well-being, small daily investments yielding remarkable long-term returns. But what happens when you face not just daily challenges, but truly devastating losses? How did the Stoics handle deep pain while maintaining their sanity? In the next section, I'll share Seneca's most powerful technique for facing losses, the same one he used when he was exiled and lost his entire fortune overnight. It's about a specific type of visualization that seems counterintuitive, but that psychologists today call emotional inoculation. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, heart racing, worried about losing something important, your job, a relationship, your health? That sense of dread that comes with uncertainty is something we all experience. The fear of loss can be more paralyzing than the loss itself, creating a constant background anxiety that drains our energy and diminishes our joy. What's fascinating is that the Stoics identified this exact pattern 2,000 years ago. They understood that much of our suffering comes not from what we've actually lost, but from our fear of potential losses and our attachment to things outside our control. And they developed a counterintuitive practice to address this, one that modern psychology now validates as highly effective. Seneca, who served as advisor to Emperor Nero, possibly history's most dangerous boss, wrote, "He who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." This wasn't just philosophical musing. It was born from intense personal experience. When Seneca was exiled and lost his entire fortune overnight, he didn't collapse into despair as many would. Instead, he drew upon a Stoic practice he'd been cultivating for years. This brings us to what I consider the most powerful Stoic technique for building emotional resilience, what they called premeditatio malorum, which I've renamed the contemplation of loss. This practice involves voluntarily visualizing the temporary or permanent loss of what we value most. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't that just negative thinking? Won't focusing on potential losses make me more anxious? That's a natural reaction, but there's a crucial difference between worried rumination and strategic contemplation. Worry is unfocused anxiety about what might go wrong. Contemplation of loss is a deliberate, time-limited practice that builds emotional readiness. Think of it like a vaccination. A vaccine introduces a small, controlled dose of a pathogen to prepare your immune system. Similarly, contemplation of loss introduces a controlled dose of potential loss to strengthen your emotional resilience. When you've mentally rehearsed handling a loss, the actual experience, if it comes, has less power to devastate you. Let me share how this worked in my own life. Years ago, I became increasingly anxious about my dependency on technology, specifically my smartphone. The thought of losing or breaking it would trigger genuine panic. Following the Stoic practice, I decided to spend a weekend completely without it. The first few hours were uncomfortable. I felt phantom vibrations and kept reaching for a device that wasn't there. But by Sunday, something remarkable had happened. Not only had I survived, but I discovered resources within myself that had been overshadowed by constant connectivity. When I returned to using my phone, my relationship with it had fundamentally changed. The fear of losing it had diminished because I'd proven to myself I could function without it. This is exactly what Seneca meant when he wrote, "Set aside now and then a number of days during which you will be content with the plainest of food, and very little of it, with rough and coarse clothing, and will ask yourself, is this what one used to dread?" This practice isn't about pessimism or depriving yourself of joy. It's about freedom from the fear of loss through mental preparation. It's about distinguishing between enjoying something and being controlled by your attachment to it, Let's make this practical with what I call the visualization of deprivation exercise. Choose something you depend on or strongly value. It could be your smartphone, social media, coffee, a relationship, even your health or physical abilities. Now spend 60 seconds genuinely visualizing what your life would be like without it for a period of time. How would you adapt? What resources would you draw upon? What might you discover about yourself? Take that minute now. I'll wait. How did that feel? Uncomfortable, perhaps? That discomfort is precisely where growth happens. By voluntarily facing the possibility of loss in a controlled way, you're building the emotional muscles needed to handle whatever life brings. For things you're particularly attached to, you can take this practice a step further with a deprivation practice, temporarily living without something you normally consider essential. This could mean a day without your smartphone, a week without social media, a month without complaining, or even practicing using your non-dominant hand for simple tasks, simulating adaptation to physical limitation. This might sound extreme, but it's remarkably effective. A study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that participants who practiced voluntary deprivation for just 48 hours reported significantly increased appreciation for what they temporarily gave up and decreased anxiety about potentially losing it in the future. But what about more significant losses? Relationships, health, even loved ones? The Stoics didn't shy away from contemplating even these most profound losses. Marcus Aurelius, who lost several children during his lifetime, wrote, "Keep in mind how fast things pass by and are gone, those that are now and those to come. Existence flows past us like a river. Nothing is stable, not even what's right here." This isn't morbid, it's clarifying. By acknowledging the temporary nature of everything we value, we're motivated to appreciate it fully in the present rather than taking it for granted. It creates what psychologists call anticipatory resilience, the emotional readiness to handle losses with grace when they occur. Think about your most important relationships. The Stoic practice would encourage occasionally reflecting on the reality that all relationships are temporary, whether through changing circumstances, growing apart, or ultimately, death. This reflection isn't meant to diminish your joy in these connections, but to enhance it through conscious appreciation of their precious, temporary nature. As Epictetus taught, when you kiss your child, your wife, or your friend, remind yourself that you are kissing a mortal thing. Thus, if one of them should die, you will not be disturbed. This sounds harsh to modern ears, but the intention isn't to reduce love. It's to enhance appreciation while building resilience against the inevitable losses life brings. Try this simple practice. The next time you're with someone important to you, silently remind yourself of the temporary nature of all relationships. Notice how this awareness doesn't diminish your connection, but often deepens it through heightened appreciation of the present moment. A client of mine who struggled with constant worry about losing her partner found that this practice paradoxically strengthened their relationship. Rather than clinging from fear, she could love more freely, knowing she had developed the inner resources to handle whatever came. As she told me, "I stopped loving from fear and started loving from strength." The Stoics extended this practice to contemplating their own mortality as well. Seneca advised, "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time." Modern research confirms the psychological benefits of this approach. A study from the University of Kentucky found that participants who engaged in brief mortality contemplation reported greater gratitude, more focus on meaningful goals, and less attachment to trivial concerns compared to control groups. To be clear, this practice isn't about dwelling morbidly on loss or death. It's about using their reality as motivation to live more fully now. It's the difference between fearful avoidance and courageous acknowledgement. When applied to material possessions and financial concerns, this practice is particularly liberating. Many of us live with constant background anxiety about financial security. The Stoic approach would be to directly contemplate, what would I do if I lost my job? What if my investments failed? What if I had to significantly downsize? By working through these scenarios mentally, we develop confidence in our adaptability. Seneca, who was one of the wealthiest men in Rome before his exile, later wrote that his practice of voluntary simplicity had prepared him for his actual losses. Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" Pause for a moment and consider one material thing you fear losing. Now spend 30 seconds genuinely contemplating how you would adapt if you lost it tomorrow. What resources would you draw upon? What strategies would you employ? How might you even find opportunities within that challenge? This mental rehearsal builds what psychologists call psychological flexibility, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining your core values and sense of purpose. It's not about expecting the worst, but about removing the fear of the worst by proving to yourself that you could handle it. A particularly powerful variation of this practice is what I call the good in the bad exercise. For any loss or challenge you're contemplating, ask yourself, what opportunities might emerge from this? What might I learn? How might I grow? This shifts your perspective from pure avoidance to strategic adaptation. For example, if you're contemplating losing your job, you might identify opportunities to explore long-deferred interests, develop new skills, or pursue a more fulfilling career path. This doesn't mean you want to lose your job. It means you're refusing to be mentally paralyzed by the possibility. A client who used this approach while facing a potential health diagnosis told me, "For the first time, I could see that even the worst-case scenario contained possibilities for meaningful living. That realization alone reduced my anxiety more than anything else I'd tried." The ultimate goal of the contemplation of loss isn't to eliminate care or concern. It's to transform debilitating attachment into appreciative enjoyment. It's about loving fully while holding lightly. As Epictetus said, "Never say that you have lost anything, only that you have returned it." This perspective recognizes that everything we value, possessions, relationships, abilities, even life itself, is ultimately on loan to us for a time. When practiced regularly, this approach creates what the Stoics called euthymia, a state of tranquility that comes from being prepared for whatever life brings. It's not emotional flatness, but emotional freedom, the ability to enjoy life's pleasures fully without being controlled by fear of their loss. So here's my challenge to you. This week, select one thing you value highly and practice both contemplating its loss and temporarily living without it, if possible. Notice how this practice doesn't diminish your appreciation, but transforms your relationship with it from anxious attachment to grateful enjoyment. Remember that this practice isn't about pessimism, but about freedom through preparation. As Seneca wrote, "The wise person can lose nothing, for they have everything lodged in themselves, virtue, which needs no adventitious adornments, which is sufficient unto itself." But life isn't just about avoiding suffering. It's about flourishing even in the most challenging circumstances. In the next section, we'll explore how the Stoics found purpose and meaning in any situation through what Marcus Aurelius called amor fati, the love of fate. This principle transformed the life of a client facing a chronic, incurable illness, showing her how to find purpose not despite her challenge, but through it. Imagine facing a difficult medical diagnosis, a significant loss, or an unplanned life change, and still feeling a deep sense of purpose. Not forcing toxic positivity or denying the challenge, but genuinely finding meaning within it. This isn't just possible, it's precisely what the Stoics mastered, and their approach remains transformative today. The Stoics developed a concept called amor fati, the love of fate. Not mere acceptance or resignation, but a profound embracing of everything that happens as necessary and valuable. As Nietzsche later described it, not merely bear what is necessary, but love it. This isn't about being a doormat or giving up agency. It's about transforming your relationship with circumstances you cannot change. Marcus Aurelius captured this mindset perfectly. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes, the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Consider what he's saying here. Obstacles aren't just things to overcome. They're the actual path to growth. The challenge itself becomes the opportunity. This represents a radical shift from how most of us relate to difficulties. Think about the last unexpected problem you faced. Perhaps a project falling through, a relationship ending, or a health setback. What was your immediate internal reaction? Most of us default to resistance. This shouldn't be happening. This ruins everything. Why me? The crucial distinction between this common reaction and the Stoic approach isn't about the external situation, but about our relationship to it. The difference between "this shouldn't be happening" and "this is happening and I will find meaning within it" is life-changing. Let me share a powerful example. A client of mine was diagnosed with a chronic illness that limited her mobility and energy. Initially, she responded as most of us would, with grief, anger, and resistance. Why me? This isn't fair. My life is over. These are natural responses, and the Stoics would never suggest suppressing such emotions. However, as we worked with Stoic practices, something remarkable happened. She began asking different questions. Given this new reality, what meaningful contribution can I still make? What unique perspective does this challenge give me? How might this limitation become a specialization rather than just a restriction? Within 6 months, she had created an online community supporting others with similar conditions, sharing coping strategies she was developing. Her limitation became her specialization. Her obstacle became her way. As she told me, I would never have chosen this illness, but I can choose to create meaning through it rather than despite it. This isn't about pretending challenges are fun or easy. It's about refusing to give difficulties the power to determine your purpose and meaning. As Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps and developed logotherapy, wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." The Stoics would completely agree. Epictetus, who lived with physical disability after his leg was broken during his time as a slave, taught that adverse circumstances reveal our true character and capabilities. "Circumstances don't make the man, they only reveal him to himself," he wrote. His physical limitation became central to his teaching about inner freedom. So how do we develop this capacity to find purpose in any circumstance? Let's start with a practical exercise I call the obstacle reversal. Take a piece of paper and identify a current challenge you're facing. Now, specifically list 3 ways this obstacle could potentially be an opportunity for growth, meaning, or contribution. Take 30 seconds right now to think of your challenge and one potential opportunity within it. I'll wait. Did you find an opportunity? If it was difficult, that's completely normal. This skill develops with practice. The key is making it specific rather than general. Instead of, "Maybe I'll grow from this somehow," specify exactly how. This job loss could finally push me to pursue the creative field I've always been drawn to. Or, this health challenge could deepen my empathy and patience. When we practice this consistently, we develop what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. the ability to derive meaningful positive change from challenging life crises. Research shows that individuals who find meaning in difficulties recover more quickly and often report greater well-being than their pre-crisis levels. Now, let's deepen this practice with what I call the purpose pivot. When facing any challenge, ask yourself these three questions. First, what valuable perspective does this difficulty give me that I wouldn't otherwise have? Second, who might benefit from what I'm learning through this experience? Third, how does this challenge connect me to deeper values or meaningful purposes? These questions reframe adversity from meaningless suffering to purposeful experience. They help us pivot from "why is this happening to me?" to "what is this making possible?" Let me give you another example. A client lost his job during company-wide layoffs after 15 years with the organization. Initially devastated, he applied the purpose pivot questions. The valuable perspective he gained was insight into how much he'd been sacrificing his health and family relationships for career advancement. Those who might benefit from his experience included others navigating career transitions, whom he began mentoring. And the deeper values his challenge connected him to included presence with his children and creative expression he'd long neglected. Within a year, he had created a completely different career path that supported these rediscovered values. As he told me, the layoff wasn't just a closing door, but an opening one, though I couldn't see that at first. This approach transforms our relationship with failure as well. Most of us have been conditioned to see failure as something to avoid at all costs. The Stoics saw it differently, as essential information and opportunity for growth. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." Just as muscles grow through resistance, our character and capabilities develop through challenges. The next time you experience a setback or failure, try what I call the Stoic reframe. Instead of saying, "I failed," say, "I learned." Instead of, "This is a disaster," say, "This is information." Instead of, "I'm back at square one," say, "I'm beginning with experience." This isn't mere wordplay or denial, it's a profound shift in how you relate to reality. The facts don't change, but your relationship to them transforms completely. Take a moment right now to think about a recent disappointment or setback. How could you apply the Stoic reframe to it? What specifically did you learn? What information did you gain? What experience can you now build upon? The beauty of this approach is that it applies to challenges both large and small. Your flight is delayed? Practice seeing it as an opportunity for reading, reflection, or connecting with fellow travelers rather than a frustrating inconvenience. Traffic jam? Use it as a chance to practice patience or listen to something enriching rather than fuming at circumstances you can't change. By practicing with these smaller daily irritations, you build the mental muscles for handling life's greater challenges. As Epictetus advised, start with things of little value. A little oil is spilled, a little wine is stolen. Say, "This is the price of tranquility and peace of mind." A particularly powerful application of this approach is in relationships. When someone disappoints or frustrates you, the Stoic question isn't, "Why are they like this?" but "What virtue might this situation be calling me to develop?" Perhaps patience, understanding, clearer communication, or healthy boundary setting. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly with difficult people, writing, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, 'The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly.'" This wasn't pessimism but preparation, a reminder that others' behavior provides opportunities to practice virtue. Let's try another practical exercise, the growth inventory. Think about a challenging relationship in your life, someone who regularly tests your patience or triggers emotional reactions. Instead of focusing on how they should change, ask yourself, What qualities or virtues am I developing through this challenging relationship that I might not develop otherwise? Perhaps you're learning assertion, emotional regulation, clearer communication, or compassion. By reframing the relationship as a growth opportunity rather than just a problem, you transform your experience of it without requiring the other person to change. Now, I want to address a common misconception about this Stoic approach. Some people hear "love your fate" and think it means passive acceptance of injustice or unnecessary suffering. That's not at all what the Stoics advocated. They were incredibly active in political and social life, working to improve conditions for themselves and others. The key distinction is between acceptance of current reality as a starting point and resignation to it as an end point. Stoics accept what is as the necessary foundation for effective action, not as an excuse for inaction. As Epictetus clarified, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." This approach actually empowers more effective action because you're responding to reality as it is, not as you wish it were. You're directing your energy toward what can be changed rather than exhausting yourself fighting against what cannot. Another powerful Stoic practice for finding purpose in difficulty is what I call the bigger picture perspective. When facing a challenge, ask, how might this difficulty be serving some larger purpose that I cannot yet see? This isn't about magical thinking or assuming the universe has personal plans for you. It's about recognizing that our limited perspective often prevents us from seeing the complete pattern of cause and effect. Seneca wrote, "No man can have a peaceful life who thinks too much about lengthening it. Most powerful is he who has himself in his own power." This captures the Stoic emphasis on focusing on what we can control, our judgments and actions, rather than outcomes beyond our influence. A client struggling with a career setback used this perspective by asking, "What might this delay be making possible that I can't yet see?" This simple shift from resistance to curiosity created mental space for new opportunities. Within months, a far better position emerged, one that wouldn't have been available had his original plans succeeded. The ultimate Stoic practice for embracing your fate is what I call the reverse gratitude journal. Instead of listing what went well today, identify something challenging and write specifically how it contributed to your growth, learning, or character development. This trains your mind to automatically search for purpose within difficulties rather than merely enduring them. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything that happens is either endurable or not. If it's endurable, then endure it. If it's not endurable, then stop complaining. Your destruction will mean its end as well." This direct, even harsh-sounding advice contains profound wisdom. It cuts through self-pity and focuses on the practical question: can you endure this? If yes, then do so with dignity. If truly no, then the suffering will end one way or another. Either way, complaint adds unnecessary suffering to the necessary. When practiced consistently, these Stoic approaches develop what psychologists now call psychological flexibility, the ability to remain in contact with the present moment, regardless of what it contains, and to adjust behavior in the service of chosen values. Research shows this quality is more predictive of mental health and life satisfaction than many other psychological factors. Remember, embracing your fate doesn't mean you enjoy every experience. Marcus Aurelius didn't enjoy the battlefield or palace conspiracies. Seneca didn't enjoy exile. Epictetus didn't enjoy physical disability. Yet they all found purpose and meaning within these challenges rather than despite them. As you continue developing this Stoic mindset, you'll notice something remarkable. Your fear of potential difficulties gradually diminishes. When you know you can find purpose in any circumstance, the future becomes less threatening. As one client told me, I still prefer things to go well, but I'm no longer afraid of them going badly. Either way, I can create meaning. But now that you have tools for handling external challenges, let's turn to perhaps the harshest critic you'll ever face, that voice inside your own mind. In the next chapter, I'll reveal the surprising technique Marcus Aurelius used to transform his internal dialogue from saboteur to ally. It's the same method that allowed a client to overcome 20 years of paralyzing self-criticism in just 6 weeks. Have you noticed how you talk to yourself in a way you'd never speak to a friend? That harsh inner voice that says, "You messed everything up," or "You'll never succeed." We all have this critical internal dialogue, but few of us realize how much power it has over our well-being and decision-making. This internal critic isn't just occasional negative self-talk. It's a constant background narrative shaping how we experience everything from minor setbacks to major life events. And while we've been focusing on external challenges, perhaps the most important battlefield is within your own mind. Marcus Aurelius understood this profoundly. His meditations weren't written for publication. They were essentially a private journal where he worked on his own internal dialogue. He was having conversations with himself, deliberately shaping how he spoke to himself. As Emperor of Rome, he recognized that mastering this inner voice was more important than commanding armies. "Be strict with yourself and tolerant with others," Marcus wrote. But here's the crucial distinction. Being strict with yourself doesn't mean being harshly critical. It means holding yourself to high standards with disciplined compassion, not punishing self-criticism. Most of us have this backwards. We're lenient with our own bad habits, but brutally judgmental of our mistakes. We'd never speak to a friend the way we speak to ourselves. This internal harshness doesn't improve performance. Research shows it actually reduces motivation and effectiveness, while increasing anxiety and depression. The Stoics developed a technique I call cognitive distancing, separating yourself from your thoughts through conscious observation. This isn't about suppressing negative thoughts, but about recognizing them as mental events rather than objective truths. When you think "I'm a failure," the Stoic practice is to notice, "I'm having the thought that I'm a failure." This slight reframing creates crucial space between you and the thought. The thought becomes something you're observing rather than something you are. Modern cognitive therapy calls this metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your thoughts rather than being fused with them. Research shows this simple shift reduces emotional reactivity and improves psychological flexibility. Try this right now. Think of a self-critical thought you've had recently. Now rephrase it as, "I'm having the thought that..." Notice how this small change creates a different relationship with the thought. You're no longer identified with it. You're observing it. This practice becomes even more powerful when combined with what I call the inner advisor exercise. Instead of letting your default critical voice run the show, deliberately develop a wise inner voice based on Stoic principles. Ask yourself, how would I speak to a friend facing this exact situation? Then apply that same compassionate wisdom to yourself. This isn't about empty positive thinking, but about bringing balanced perspective to your self-evaluation. Epictetus taught his students this approach by asking, "When your child or wife dies, would you say, 'I have lost them'? No, you would say, 'I have returned them.'" This reframing acknowledges reality while shifting the relationship to it. Apply this to mistakes and setbacks. Instead of "I failed," try "That approach didn't work." Instead of "I'm terrible at this," try "I'm still developing this skill." The facts remain the same, but your relationship to them transforms. The science of self-compassion supports this approach. Dr. Kristin Neff's research shows that self-compassionate people are actually more likely to take responsibility for mistakes and make meaningful changes than those who are harshly self-critical. Contrary to popular belief, self-compassion doesn't make you soft, it makes you resilient. A client of mine struggled with perfectionism that paralyzed her decision-making. Every mistake triggered brutal self-criticism, making her increasingly risk-averse. Through practicing cognitive distancing and developing her inner advisor, she began treating herself with the same balanced feedback she'd give a respected colleague. The transformation was remarkable. Not only did her anxiety decrease, but her performance improved because she could learn from mistakes without being devastated by them. As she told me, "I'm actually holding myself to higher standards now, but without the paralyzing fear of failure." Marcus Aurelius exemplified this balanced self-dialogue. In his journal, we see him regularly reminding himself of his values and principles without harsh judgment when he falls short. He acknowledges mistakes matter-of-factly, extracts the lesson, and recommits to his principles. For example, after dealing with difficult people, he doesn't berate himself for feeling irritated. Instead, he writes, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, 'The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly.'" He's preparing his mind rather than punishing it. Let's practice this right now with what I call the third-person technique. When facing a challenging situation, refer to yourself by name instead of using I. Research shows this simple shift creates psychological distance that improves emotional regulation and rational thinking. For example, instead of thinking, "I'm so nervous about this presentation," think, "John is preparing for his presentation." This slight change activates different brain regions, allowing you to access your own wisdom more effectively. Try this right now. Think of a challenge you're currently facing. Now reframe it in the third person, using your name. Notice how this creates a sense of perspective and calm that's harder to access when you're completely identified with the problem. This technique is particularly powerful before high-pressure situations. Studies show that athletes who use third-person self-talk before competitions experience less anxiety and better performance than those using first-person internal dialogue. A client who struggled with social anxiety used this before networking events. Instead of thinking, "I'm terrified of making a bad impression," she would think, "Emma is attending the event to make two interesting connections." This simple reframing reduced her anxiety and clarified her purpose. But what about after you've made a mistake? This is where most people's internal dialogue becomes particularly vicious. The Stoic approach is fundamentally different from our default self-flagellation. When you've erred, practice what I call factual self-assessment. First, state exactly what happened without judgment or emotional language. Second, identify what can be learned. Third, specify how you'll apply that learning going forward. For example, instead of, "I completely bombed that presentation because I'm terrible at public speaking," try, "The presentation didn't achieve its objectives. I spoke too quickly and didn't address key questions. Next time, I'll practice more thoroughly and prepare responses to likely questions." This factual approach maintains accountability without the emotional devastation that prevents real improvement. As Seneca wrote, "To err is human, but to persist in error is foolish." Notice he doesn't say persisting in self-criticism is foolish. He says persisting in the error itself is what we should avoid. Let's address a common concern. But doesn't self-criticism motivate me to improve? Research consistently shows the opposite is true. Self-criticism activates threat responses in the brain that inhibit learning and creative problem-solving. Self-compassion, by contrast, creates safety that enables genuine growth. Think about when you learned most effectively. Was it when someone was harshly criticizing you, triggering your defenses? Or when you felt safe enough to acknowledge mistakes and experiment with new approaches? The same principle applies to your internal dialogue. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, understood that true freedom starts in the mind, Make it your study often to consider how all is derived from change, he taught. This includes your own thoughts and abilities. They're not fixed traits, but processes that can be modified through practice. This brings us to a powerful daily practice, the compassionate review. Each evening, ask 3 questions. What went well today? What was challenging? What would I do differently? Answer with the balanced perspective of a wise mentor rather than a harsh critic. This practice combines accountability with compassion, exactly the balance the Stoics advocated. You're neither ignoring mistakes nor being defined by them. You're using them as information for growth. A client who had struggled with 20 years of paralyzing self-criticism used this practice for just 6 weeks with remarkable results. The evening review became a reset button, preventing negative experiences from spiraling into global self-judgment. As he reported, "For the first time, I can make mistakes without thinking I am a mistake." This transformation of internal dialogue extends to how you think about your capabilities. The Stoics recognized that our beliefs about our abilities profoundly impact our actions. When you think, "I can't handle this," you've already limited your resources before even beginning. Practice what I call capacity-focused thinking. Instead of asking, "Can I do this?" ask, "How might I approach this?" The first question invites a yes-no answer that can trigger anxiety. The second activates problem-solving and resourcefulness. Marcus Aurelius used this approach when facing seemingly overwhelming challenges as emperor. Instead of questioning his ability to handle multiple crises, he focused on the specific actions available to him in each moment. Concentrate every minute on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness, he wrote. Let's try a powerful visualization exercise. Think of a challenge you're currently facing that triggers self-doubt. Now imagine your wisest self, the version of you that has integrated all the Stoic practices we've discussed. How would this wise self approach the challenge? What would they say to you about it? Take 30 seconds to really see and hear this wise self. This exercise activates what psychologists call possible selves, mental representations that can guide current behavior. By vividly imagining your Stoic wise self, you create a neural template that becomes increasingly accessible with practice. The ultimate goal isn't eliminating all negative self-talk. That's neither possible nor desirable. The goal is developing a balanced internal dialogue where criticism is constructive, factual, and kind, rather than destructive, distorted, and harsh. As you continue practicing these techniques, you'll notice something remarkable. The quality of your internal dialogue begins to match how you'd speak to someone you deeply respect. This isn't egoism, but appropriate self-regard. As Seneca wrote, "If you wish to be loved, love." This applies to yourself as well. If you wish to treat yourself well, you must practice treating yourself well. Remember that, like all the Stoic practices we've explored, transforming your internal dialogue is an ongoing process, not a destination. Even Marcus Aurelius, after decades of philosophical practice, still needed to write reminders to himself about proper thinking. The key is consistent practice, not perfection. Now that we've addressed how to transform your relationship with external challenges and your internal dialogue, we're ready to explore how all these practices integrate into what the Stoics considered the ultimate goal: tranquility, or ataraxia, not as passive detachment, but as dynamic engagement with life from a place of internal stability. A client described this transformation as observing weather patterns moving across the sky instead of being caught in the storm. This is the true emperor's mindset, and it's within your reach starting today. Imagine waking up 3 months from now, having diligently practiced the emperor's mindset. How would your life be different? The same triggers would still exist: difficult colleagues, traffic jams, relationship conflicts, but your relationship to them would be fundamentally different. Instead of being swept away by reactive emotions, you'd experience what psychologists call response flexibility, the ability to choose your reaction rather than being controlled by it. One client described this shift as like watching weather patterns move across the sky instead of being caught in the storm. The emotions still arrive, but they pass through without taking you hostage. This is the transformation the Stoics were after. Not emotional suppression, but emotional freedom. This emotional freedom creates a cascade of positive effects throughout your life. When you're no longer drained by reactive emotions, you have more energy for what truly matters. Your decision-making improves because you're operating from clarity rather than reactivity. Your relationships deepen because you respond to people rather than reacting to your interpretations of them. Think about how this might transform your work life. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming now appear as opportunities for growth. When a colleague takes credit for your idea, instead of seething with resentment, which solves nothing, you calmly address the situation or strategically ensure your contributions are recognized next time. A study from Harvard Business School found that employees who demonstrated Stoic-like resilience received 23% higher performance ratings and were 47% more likely to be promoted over a 2-year period compared to equally skilled peers. This makes perfect sense. People who maintain clarity under pressure make better decisions and collaborate more effectively. In relationships, you'll find yourself truly listening instead of preparing your defensive response. When your partner says something hurtful, your imperial pause creates space to ask, "What's really going on here?" rather than escalating with your own attack. This shift from reactivity to curiosity transforms how conflicts unfold. A client who implemented these techniques in his marriage reported that arguments that once lasted days now resolved in minutes, not because the issues disappeared, but because both partners could address them from reason rather than emotional defensiveness. "We still disagree," he told me, "but we disagree better." With your health, you'll notice that the chronic stress that once manifested as tension headaches, digestive issues, or sleep problems begins to diminish. Research has consistently shown that emotional reactivity triggers inflammatory responses in the body, while practices that promote cognitive flexibility reduce markers of inflammation. A study published in the Annals of Behavioral Medicine found that participants who practiced Stoic-inspired cognitive distancing techniques showed a 15% reduction in cortisol, the primary stress hormone, compared to control groups. Your body literally functions better when your mind isn't constantly in emergency mode. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurs in your relationship with yourself. The constant self-criticism that once dominated your internal dialogue begins to shift as you apply the same perspective-taking to your own mistakes and failures. As Marcus Aurelius advised himself, be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. But this strictness isn't harsh self-punishment. It's the disciplined pursuit of growth through clear-eyed self-assessment. You'll begin to notice subtle shifts in how you talk to yourself. Instead of, "I'm such an idiot for making that mistake," you'll think, "I made an error that I can learn from." Instead of, "I'm a failure," you'll think, "That attempt didn't succeed, and now I have valuable information for my next try." This self-compassion isn't weakness, it's strategic. Research from Dr. Kristin Neff at the University of Texas shows that self-compassionate people are actually more likely to take responsibility for their mistakes and make meaningful changes than those who are harshly self-critical. Take a moment right now to notice your internal dialogue about something that didn't go well recently. How do you speak to yourself about it? Now imagine revising that dialogue with the balanced perspective of a wise mentor, acknowledging the reality while maintaining compassion and focusing on growth. As your practice deepens, you'll experience what the Stoics considered the ultimate goal: tranquility, what they called ataraxia. Not as passive detachment, but as dynamic engagement with life from a place of internal stability. This doesn't mean you'll never feel negative emotions. Even Marcus Aurelius experienced anger, grief, and anxiety. The difference is that these emotions no longer define your experience or determine your actions. As Epictetus said, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Think about the situations that reliably trigger you now: the critical comment from a colleague, the driver who cuts you off, the political post on social media. With consistent Stoic practice, these triggers don't disappear, but they lose their power to derail you. You respond rather than react, choose rather than compulsively follow emotional scripts. A particularly powerful measure of this transformation is how you handle uncertainty. Most people find the unknown deeply uncomfortable, leading to anxiety and avoidance. The Stoic practitioner develops comfort with uncertainty, recognizing it as the natural state of affairs rather than something to fear. Seneca addressed this directly. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. When we embrace the limits of knowledge and control, we free ourselves from the suffering that comes from demanding certainty in an inherently uncertain world. Pause the video and imagine yourself with this level of mental clarity and emotional stability. How would you handle your current challenges differently? What would become possible that seems impossible now? The ultimate transformation isn't becoming someone else. It's becoming fully yourself, freed from the reactive patterns that have limited your potential. It's reclaiming the natural clarity and wisdom that is your birthright as a rational being. I won't pretend this path is easy. Like any worthwhile skill, developing the Emperor's mindset requires consistent practice and patience with yourself when you inevitably fall short. There will be days when you forget everything you've learned and react exactly as you always have. As I tell my clients, 20 steps forward and 19 steps back is still progress. The key is to approach this practice with the same perspective-taking you're developing. When you slip back into old patterns, don't judge yourself harshly. Simply notice what happened, learn from it, and recommit to your practice. Remember that Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not as a finished master, but as a student, constantly reminding himself of what he was still learning. His journal was full of the same reminders, repeated in different ways, because he, too, needed constant reinforcement of these principles. The path to thinking like a Roman emperor isn't about reaching some final state of perfection. It's about the daily practice of returning to reason when emotions pull you away. It's about building a relationship with your mind based on wisdom rather than reactivity. As you continue this practice beyond the 4-week program, you'll find that what once required conscious effort becomes increasingly natural. The imperial pause becomes reflexive. Perspective shifting becomes your default approach to challenges. The distinction between what you can and cannot control becomes instantly clear. Think of it like learning to drive. Initially, every aspect requires conscious attention: the pedals, the steering, the mirrors, the signals. But with practice, these actions become automatic, freeing your attention for navigation and responding to road conditions. The same happens with Stoic practices. They eventually require less conscious effort while yielding greater results. Let me share a personal example of how this integration happens. I once received a scathing email criticism of a project I'd worked on for months. My initial reaction years ago would have been defensive anger followed by anxious rumination. But after practicing the Stoic techniques we've discussed, my response was completely different. I noticed the emotional trigger, imperial pause, separated the event from my judgments about it, cognitive distancing, considered multiple perspectives, perspective shifting, focused on what I could control, dichotomy of control, and found the growth opportunity in the feedback, amor fati. This entire process, which once would have taken days of emotional turmoil, now happened in minutes. The result? I was able to extract the useful elements from the criticism, implement improvements, and maintain productive relationships, all without the emotional suffering that would have previously accompanied this situation. This is the legacy of the Stoics, not abstract philosophy, but practical wisdom that transforms how we experience being human. As Seneca wrote, philosophy is not a matter of talk, but of deeds. One client described her experience after 6 months of consistent practice. I used to feel like life was happening to me. Now I feel like I'm happening to life. This shift from victim to agent, from passive recipient to active participant, is the essence of the Stoic transformation. Research supports this subjective experience. A meta-analysis of Stoic-inspired interventions published in the Journal of Cognitive Psychology found significant improvements in resilience, life satisfaction, and emotional regulation across diverse populations. The ancient wisdom works, and modern science confirms it. So what specific practices should you continue beyond the 4-week program? Here's what I recommend as a sustainable daily practice. Each morning, spend 3 minutes on strategic premeditation, anticipating potential challenges and visualizing applying the imperial pause. Throughout your day, implement the pause whenever you notice emotional triggering. Each evening, conduct a brief, compassionate review of your day, noting where you practice successfully and where you can improve tomorrow. Weekly, spend 15 minutes applying the 3-view method to any significant challenge you're facing. Monthly, conduct a deeper review of your progress, celebrating improvements and identifying areas for continued growth. This sustainable practice takes minimal time but yields transformative results when maintained consistently. As Epictetus taught, practice yourself for heaven's sake in little things, and thence proceed to greater. Remember that this practice isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about emotional choice rather than emotional compulsion. The Stoics valued joy, love, and appropriate concern. They simply distinguished between emotions that align with reason and those that distort it. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." This isn't positive thinking, it's accurate thinking, seeing reality clearly without the distortions of cognitive biases and emotional reactivity. Don't wait for some perfect moment to begin. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. The Emperor's Mindset is available to you right now, not because you rule an empire, but because you have the same human capacity for reason and choice that Marcus Aurelius cultivated 2,000 years ago. The only question is whether you'll choose to develop it. Start tonight with the Trigger Journal. Tomorrow morning, practice your first strategic premeditation. Apply the imperial pause to the very next emotional trigger you experience. Step by step, day by day, you'll build the mental clarity and emotional stability that will transform every aspect of your life. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Your step begins now, with the decision to practice what you've learned. And while the path isn't always easy, I can promise you this: the view from the summit, that place of tranquility amidst life's storms, is worth every step of the climb.